Hello and welcome to Mythic Mind, where we pursue wisdom on the paths between primary and secondary worlds. I'm Dr. Andrew Snyder, and I'm glad that you're here. Hello, welcome back. Today we are continuing with our Lord of the Rings study, which I originally led in the beginning of 2025. We are now about halfway through the Fellowship of the Ring, looking at Book 2, Chapters 1 through 5. I hope you enjoy. Hello, welcome back as we continue with the Fellowship of the Ring, but now moving on to Book 2, Chapters 1 through 5. Now, there's a lot that's going on in these chapters. Well, actually, there's not really... there's... These first few chapters only have so much happening narrative-wise, but there's a lot of information here in many meetings, especially the Council of Elrond, and into especially the first part of The Ring Goes South. So there's just so much we could do here. But we're going to try to stay kind of focused. And so we'll hit on this and that and bring some different things together. But we'll mostly be highlighting some certain themes that are coming out of this material. And anything else that interests you is fair game for our live meetings or Discord. All right, so let's go ahead and get into it. Now, of course, many meetings begins with Frodo waking up in Rivendell. And Gandalf is there, and he's getting some idea as to what's happened over the last little bit of time here. And Gandalf says, "Yes, fortune or fate have helped you, not to mention courage, for your heart was not touched, and only your shoulder was pierced, and that was because you resisted to the last." And this reminds me of a quote from Beowulf, and using Tolkien's translation, he says that, "Fate oft saveth a man not doomed to die, when his valor fails not." And so there's this interplay between fate and personal responsibility. That fate will go where it will, but at the same time, our decisions actually matter, and we have an obligation, a moral obligation, to exhibit that kind of courage that allows us to walk in line with our fate. And this preoccupation with the interplay between personal responsibility and the reality of fate is very much something that we see in the Northern Tales. We see this in Beowulf, we see this in the Eddic literature, we see this in the Volsung saga. The Norse tales more generally, they have a very strong sense of fate. The fates, or the Norns, they weave not only the fate of mortals, but even the fates of the gods. And so there's only but so much you can do in kind of creating something new. A lot of the reality that we have, the future that we have, is given to us, but we do have a responsibility to decide how we're going to relate in it. And the decisions that we make, they at the very least reveal the fate that is written for us. And so it's kind of just this sort of complicated, but I think also just realistic interplay between the kind of how things are meant to be, but also who it is that we are called to be, who we need to be. And so I think that we see that in this line from Gandalf, as well as in this line that we get from Beowulf. "Fate oft saveth a man not doomed to die, when his valor fails not." Now, as an aside, kind of a trivia point more than anything else, Tolkien says that Elrond originally, he's kind of a happy accident, or at least the Elrond that we know. Because he had his Elrond from the Silmarillion, who is the son of Eärendil. He is half-elven. His brother Elros decides to live a life of the mortal. He becomes the first king of Númenor. Elrond decides to live as an elf and everything that entails. And so he has this Silmarillion Elrond. Well, when he's writing The Hobbit, and we have Elrond again in Rivendell, initially he just pulled a name out from his mythology. He said here in this letter that the passage in Chapter 3 of The Hobbit, relating him to the half-elven of the mythology, was a fortunate accident, due to the difficulty of constantly inventing good names for new characters. I gave him the name Elrond casually, but as this came from the mythology, Elros and Elrond are the two sons of Eärendil, I made him half-elven. Only in the Lord was he identified with the son of Eärendil, and so the great-grandson of Luthien and Beren, a great power and a ringholder. And so initially in The Hobbit, when Elrond shows up, he is just an elf that also has the name of Elrond. It wasn't until he was writing The Lord of the Rings when he came to recognize that it actually makes sense to make this the same Elrond. And so this is just one of the many examples of how Tolkien discovered his story, how he didn't just sit down and have it all plotted out and even know who everyone was. Just as the dark figure in the Prancing Pony, he initially thought, well, okay, maybe this is Trotter the Hobbit. He realized, no, this is actually Aragorn. Well, so too, he's got this Elrond, and now he's recognizing in writing Lord of the Rings that this is the Elrond, the son of Eärendil. And so that's just an interesting insight into Tolkien's creative process. Now, let's talk a little bit about Rivendell. Now, we get this beautiful description here from Tolkien, where it says that Frodo is now safe in the last homely house east of the sea. That house was, as Bilbo had long ago reported, a perfect house, whether you like food or sleep or storytelling or singing, or just sitting and thinking best, or a pleasant mixture of them all. Merely to be there was a cure for weariness, fear, and sadness. Now, as we read this, I think we get a little bit of a different picture in our minds coming from the pages than we get coming from the screen. At least that's my own experience. I mean, like so much of Tolkien, there's some room for interpretation, for an imaginative understanding of what it is that we're reading. In fact, Tolkien says in On Fairy Stories that that's one important part of the act of subcreation. It's one thing that makes literature a unique kind of art compared to a visual adaptation. In that when you're reading literature, we all have the ability to kind of, at least, very least, have a range of possibilities regarding like how we visualize what it is that we're reading. And so we'll visualize it differently based off our experiences, based off other things we've read, based off our past, based off just kind of who we are. And so there's some flexibility there, but obviously Tolkien is still giving us some substance to work with, and so it's not a blank slate. Well, that being said, when I read of Rivendell, I actually get more of a picture of a mead hall than like this serene, ethereal monastery. In fact, this is usually the case with Tolkien's elves. That there is this somber demeanor that's present, but at the same time, there's a great deal of like festivity and gaiety and robust singing and the storytelling. Like all of that is the kind of thing that you would see in a place like Herod. And so the mead hall, that imagery that we get from Northern stories, especially something like Beowulf, is the kind of thing that really gripped Tolkien. And it is one of the primary ways that Tolkien goes about demonstrating refuge, sanctuary. It's that place that is full of warmth and life and stories and lore. It's the font. It's a font of meaning amidst an arid wasteland around you. It's the light of goodness that stands preserved over against the darkness around, over against the shadow. And so I think that imagery, and so I think of, again, to go to Beowulf, you've got Herod, you've got everyone celebrating and feasting and telling stories while Grendel awaits in the shadows outside. And so there is this firm conflict at play between the warmth and light of the mead hall and the shadow, the winter, the barrenness outside. And so that is, I think, the imagery that Tolkien is actually portraying here in a place like Rivendell. I think that some of that's kind of lost. I think that you lose some of the gaiety, some of the festivity, just the joy, the happiness of the elves that kind of, I think, is largely lost with the movies, which makes them kind of hyper serene. They're not cracking jokes. They're not laughing. Certainly no tra-la-la-lolly from The Hobbit, but I guess even Tolkien dismissed that one. Well, just to go on this description a little bit more, in letter 131, Tolkien says that Elrond symbolizes throughout the ancient wisdom, and his house represents lore, the preservation and reverent memory of all tradition concerning the good, wise, and beautiful. It is not a scene of action, but of reflection. Thus it is a place visited on the way to all deeds or adventures. It may prove to be on the direct road, as in The Hobbit, but it may be necessary to go from there in a totally unexpected course. So necessarily in The Lord of the Rings, having escaped Elrond to the imminent pursuit of the present evil, the hero departs in a wholly new direction, to go and face it at its source. And so Tolkien's saying that that Rivendell is an important part of the hero's journey. That sometimes our path will take us straight to this great sanctuary, this place of wisdom, this place of lore, but sometimes it's the place that we need to go before we go on our adventure. That we need to have our roots saturated in wisdom. We need to know something of what the world is like before we go out in the world. And so what I see in the role that Rivendell plays in The Hobbit, the role that Rivendell plays in Lord of the Rings, is at least in part something like a good education. I mean, if we wanted to kind of edge in the direction of propaganda, probably more so than Tolkien would be comfortable with, we could even say that like what we get here is potentially a picture of a thoroughgoing classical education. It's the kind of place you go to learn deep lore, to reflect, and to just rest in what is good and what is beautiful and in what is wise. And so I think that there are a number of things that we can learn from what Rivendell is and the role that it plays in these stories that we can use to pull into our world in order to create more houses of food and sleep and storytelling and singing, places of reflection, places where you can just be and where you can drink deeply from the pools of wisdom. And that's what we see in Frodo. As the evening drew on, Frodo woke up again, and he found that he no longer felt in need of rest or sleep, but he had a mind for food and drink, and probably for singing and storytelling afterwards. The enchantment of Rivendell is working, and the way that that is bearing fruit is through his impulse to sing and to tell stories, or maybe even just to hear stories. And so he's becoming part of this environment now that it's been able to wipe away some degree of the shadow. And Bilbo says that time doesn't seem to pass here, it just is. And we're told something very similar about Lothlorien when we get there. That in Rivendell and Lothlorien, time doesn't really seem to pass in the normal kind of way. And that's surely because Elrond and Galadriel both have these rings of power. And the Elven rings were meant to preserve nature, that to stop time, to stop corruption. And so surely that power plays some role in the movement of time. It provides a kind of stability, a stance against progress, against change, which is not actually entirely good, but we'll talk about that in just a little bit. I think it's worth noting when they're reflecting back on Glorfindel and his fighting with the ring race, and Frodo recognizes that he had seen this light, this bright light that was shining in contrast to the shadow of the ring race. And Gandalf says, yes, you saw him for a moment, as he is upon the other side, one of the mighty of the firstborn. He is an elf lord of a house of princes. And so he is one of the Noldor. He is one of the high elves who had been to Valinor, and that gives them a unique kind of status. They have this light about them. It makes them kind of shimmer. It allows them to stand kind of in the light of goodness, in at the very least as a reflection of the imperishable flame. Not that they themselves claim it, but that they do have that reflection, even as the trees of Valinor had a reflection of that light. And so Valinor is sort of the special place of being that shares some of that unique status with those who live there, or even apparently those who have been there. And so he has this light, which is surely an expression of the imperishable flame that Eru-Ilúvatar put at the center of reality. Not to say that the Noldor, like Glorfindel, are like part of God or something like that, but that they do have this reflection about them because they spent time in Valinor amongst the Valar and with the light of the trees. Now, I do want to highlight this scene just because of the way that's played out in the movies. I just think it's not right. That scene when Bilbo asks to see the ring and Frodo presents it. And then in the movie, you get that jump scare where Bilbo turns into this monster that's about to grab it from Frodo. But actually, by the way that I read the book, I don't think that Bilbo's actually doing anything. I think it comes down to the perception of Frodo as the ring is working in him, trying to, make Frodo view the ring as his precious. And so it says that to his distress and amazement, he found that he was no longer looking at Bilbo. A shadow seemed to have fallen between them, and through it he found himself eyeing a little wrinkled creature with a hungry face and bony groping hands. He felt a desire to strike him. Now, in my reading of this, the shadow is falling more on Frodo's eyes than on Bilbo. Notice it doesn't really say anything about Bilbo. It talks about how Frodo perceived Bilbo, and then it ends with Frodo having a desire to strike him. All of this to me speaks to the fact that the ring is working on Frodo, and that it's causing him to see Bilbo as an offender, as somebody who's going to take it from him. And so it's not so much Bilbo freaking out at Frodo, but it's more of the other way around. Well, a little bit later, Bilbo starts to sing this song, and Frodo falls into a dreamlike state. And I want to read this because I think it's just so beautiful, but also I think it's significant about what's happening. At first, the beauty of the melodies and of the interwoven words in elven tongues, even though he understood them little, held him in a spell as soon as he began to attend to them. Almost it seemed that the words took shape, and visions of far lands and bright things that he had never yet imagined opened out before him, and the firelit hall became like a golden mist above the seas of foam that sighed upon the margins of the world. Then the enchantment became more and more dreamlike, until he felt that an endless river of swelling gold and silver was flowing over him, too multitudinous for its patterns to be comprehended. It became part of the throbbing air around him, and it drenched and drowned him. Swiftly he sank under its shining weight into a deep realm of sleep. There he wandered long in a dream of music that turned into running water, and then suddenly into a voice. It seemed to be the voice of Bilbo chanting verses. Faint at first, and then clear ran the words. Frodo, hearing Bilbo's song of Eärendil in this place, in Rivendell, it really just enchanted him, and it made him in tune with the music that undergirds all of creation, right? Going back to the Eindilindale, back to the song of the Ainur that first fashioned the world. And we've already seen how song plays such an important role in Tolkien stories. There's a song or poem in just about every chapter. But in this place, where he is particularly still, where he's particularly reflective, he really gets carried away in this song. And I think this is particularly significant as Bilbo's song is about Eärendil, who plays this intercessory kind of role in, he himself, he's half-elven, and so he's half man, half elven, half mortal, half immortal. He goes to Valinor and he convinces the Valar to come engage with the plight of those on Middle Earth, and they come to overthrow Morgoth, and so he has this intercessory kind of role. He is placed up in the heavens as a light of hope to those living in the west, so that when the shadow does fall again, that they can look up and they can see this light of hope, this light shining with the Silmaril, which itself shines with the light of the two trees of Valinor. And so there's so much hope and meaning that is really tied directly back into, if you go back far enough, it's tied into this song of hope, this at the center of the world. And so Frodo is really just caught up in all of this in a way that I don't think could ever be really portrayed in a movie. And it very much reminds me of what Tolkien says about faerian drama in On Fairy Stories. He says, "Those plays which, according to abundant records, the elves have presented to men, can produce fantasy with a realism and immediacy beyond the compass of any human mechanism. As a result, their usual effect upon a man is to go beyond secondary belief. If you are present at a faerian drama, you yourself are, or think that you are, bodily inside its secondary world. The experience may be similar to dreaming, and has, it would seem, sometimes, by men, been confounded with it. But in a faerian drama, you are in a dream that some other mind is weaving, and the knowledge of that alarming fact may slip from your grasp. To experience directly a secondary world, the potion is too strong, and you give to it primary belief, however marvelous the events. You are deluded. Whether that is the intention of the elves, always, or at any time, is another question. They are at any rate not themselves deluded. This is for them a form of art, and distinct from wizardry or magic properly so called. They do not live in it, though they can perhaps afford to spend more time at it than human artists can. The primary world, reality, of elves and men is the same, if differently valued and perceived." And I think that's exactly what we have here. We have a faerian drama in which this secondary world, this history, this lore that Bilbo's unfolding for them, that this is sweeping him up and he's experiencing it almost firsthand. And I think that largely this is what Tolkien accomplishes with The Lord of the Rings, that when you do get really invested in it, it has that feel as if it's not really a secondary world at all. It becomes something primary. It becomes almost more real than the history that we know. And so there are elements of this, I think, in the writing of Lord of the Rings, but I think there's a clear presentation of this concept in dealing with this song or in experiencing this song. Now, we will talk more about Eärendil another time. I think I'm probably going to give him his own standalone beginning of the week video at some point. And so we'll just kind of leave that for now, other than what I've already said. But I do think it's worth noting that, well, first of all, it's awfully brave, it's awfully courageous of Bilbo to write and to sing this song about Eärendil, the father of Elrond, to Elrond. And so it definitely, I think, takes some courage there. Now, Bilbo's song of Eärendil, which is called the Eärendil Inwe, it was developed out of Tolkien's poem called Errantry, which is found in the Adventures of Tom Bombadil, and was written, from what I understand, some time ago in its original version, sometime before that. But in Tolkien's later introduction to the Adventures of Tom Bombadil, he says that Bilbo came up with Errantry, a so-called nonsense poem befitting of the Adventures of Tom Bombadil. He came up with this some time ago, and that he used this structure for this poem when he wrote his song about Eärendil. And it's actually interesting to look at these poems together, and so I'm going to include this Errantry poem in the module. Also, another point of interest is that the version of this poem of Bilbo, the song of Bilbo about Eärendil, this version that's in the published Lord of the Rings is actually not Tolkien's final version of it. But I think he couldn't find the final version, and so a previous version got published instead, or something like that. But somehow or another, I don't remember the exact details, but an older version ended up getting published, and so the newer one never actually made it in. But I'm going to include the updated version of Eärendil, or his most complete version, in the module as well, and so you can read through that and see where that differs from what ended up in the published version. Now, there is so much that we could say about the Council of Elrond, but I think I'm actually going to begin by reading what Tom Shippey has to say about this. And so this is from J.R. Tolkien, author of the century, although I'm reading it as quoted in the Lord of the Rings Reader's Companion. The Council of Elrond is a largely unappreciated tour de force, whose success may be gauged by the fact that few pause to recognize its complexity. It breaks, furthermore, most of the rules which might be given to an apprentice writer. For one thing, though it is 15,000 words long, in it, nothing happens. It consists entirely of people talking. For another, it has an unusual number of speakers present, 12, the majority of them, 7, unknown to the reader and appearing for the first time. Just to make things more difficult, the longest speech, by Gandalf, which takes up half the total, contained direct quotation from 7 more speakers or writers, all of them, apart from Butterbur and Gaffer Gamgee, new to the story, and some of them, Sauron, Denethor, to be extremely important to it later on. Other speakers, like Glóin, give quotations from yet more speakers, Dain and Sauron's messenger. Like so many committee meetings, this chapter could very easily have disintegrated, lost its way, or simply become too boring to follow. The fact that it does not is brought about by two things: Tolkien's extremely firm grasp of the history of Middle-earth, and his unusual ability to suggest cultural variation by differences in mode of speech. And I think that's a pretty good, just broad overview of the complexity of the Council of Elrond, kind of chapter that people tend to either love or hate. Now, personally, this is one of my favorite chapters. I love the deep dives into lore, especially the first time I read this, not knowing a lot of the Silmarillion kind of content. I really just enjoyed getting a better understanding of this world, getting a better understanding of the history. Now, one thing I thought was interesting is that when they're talking a little bit about the history of the elves, of the Noldor, and the crafting of the rings, that Tolkien says that that their fascination with the rings and the fact that they were susceptible to the wooing of Anatar, the disguised Sauron, came down to their desire for technology, their desire for science. He says in letter 153, the particular branch of the High Elves concerned, the Noldor, or Lore Masters, were always on the side of science and technology, as we should call it. They wanted to have the knowledge that Sauron genuinely had, and those of Eregion refused the warnings of Gil-galad and Elrond. The particular desire of the Eregion elves, an allegory, if you like, of a love of machinery and technical device, is also symbolized by their special friendship with the dwarves of Moria. And so these elves of Eregion, well, they desired technology, they desired power, and he even is comfortable referring to this, at least in passing, as an allegory for a love of machinery. And so they symbolize industrialization, they symbolize this desire for power over nature. And I mean, there's obviously a lot that we can do with that, but we understand, what that concern means for Tolkien. We can definitely see how that plays out in a lot of Lewis's writing. That is that recognition that progress for its own sake is not necessarily progress. The recognition that grasping at power is generally not a good thing, because when you grasp at power, it ends up grasping you, or at the very least, putting you in the grasp of those who truly do have power. And so I think that's just an interesting note there to get at one of these undergirding themes, that there is this desire for technology, desire for power, even in the elves, and that's how we get the crafting of the rings to begin with. Now, of course, I have to talk about Sauron of many colors. So Gandalf says that I looked then and saw that his robes, which had seemed white, were not so, but were woven of all colors, and if he moved they shimmered and changed hue, so that the eye was bewildered. I liked white better, I said. White, he sneered. It serves as a beginning. White cloth may be dyed. The white page can be overwritten, and the white light can be broken. In which case it is no longer white, said I, and he that breaks a thing to find out what it is has left the path of wisdom. And that's just more rebuke about this idea of progress for the sake of progress. Sauron sees white as a starting point, but not an ending point, despite the fact that that's not really how light works. And so imagine you have a white light coming down on a prism. Well, when it hits the prism, it refracts into the many colors, to the many colors of the light spectrum. But at that point, what you actually have is not many lights. What you really have is a broken light. The beam has been broken. It's no longer what it originally was. It's something diverse, yes, but the more diverse you become without unity, the more really disintegrated you become, the closer to nothing you become. The white light, in many ways, is more real than the refracted beams of various colored rays. And so what we want to be doing is we look out at this world that has so many different things, this world of apparent chaos, this world that seems to be so fragmented. And what we do is we look at all these different beams of light, these different colors, and we follow them. And as we follow them, we find that they actually move closer and closer together in the direction of unity, to the point where, okay, maybe what if we can never achieve white fully in this experience of the world? What we can do is move closer and closer and closer toward its unifying reality, where things move further together. And in so doing, we gain cohesion. We become more ourselves, and the world becomes more the world, as something real, as something substantial. And this is the path of conservation. I don't just mean environmentalism, although obviously Tolkien was concerned about the environment. Right? This is the path of wisdom. We move toward the light, toward that goodness which always has been and always will be. We recognize that it is the light that stands above the shadow, and so that's the direction that we want to go. But Sauron is moving the wrong direction. He's moving toward disintegration. He's moving toward nothingness. And of course, that is exactly what he is going to end up in the end, as a vapor, because he is going to rid himself of his very substance. As opposed to Gandalf, currently the Grey, who will actually gain more power in becoming the White. And so they're moving in opposite directions, one becoming less real, one's becoming more real. And I also think it's worth noting when Sauron says, when he reveals some of his plan, he says, as the power grows, its proved friends will also grow, and the wise, such as you and I, may with patience come at last to direct its courses, to control it. We can bide our time. We can keep our thoughts in our hearts, deploring maybe evils done by the way, but approving the high and ultimate purpose, knowledge, rule, order, all the things that we have so far striven in vain to accomplish, hindered rather than helped by our weak or idle friends. There would not be any real change in our designs, only in our means. If you've only seen the movies, you might get the impression that Saruman is the Sith apprentice to Sauron. That's really not the case. That Sauron doesn't see himself as as forming an alliance with Sauron. He's basically working with him long enough to bide his time, so that, well, I guess this does kind of fall into the Sith Apprentice idea. Eventually, Sauron will be able to take charge. He'll be able to maybe overthrow Sauron, or at the very least direct his course. And so Sauron is really trying to set himself up as the Dark Lord. He is really working against Sauron, but for his own benefit. And he does this in a way that tries to rationalize what he's doing. Because he figures, well, Sauron's obviously bad. If I were in charge, I mean, I'd set things right. I would maintain order. I would highlight the importance of knowledge. I would have good rule. I would have justice, because I would be able to put those things in place. And, of course, this very same temptation is in Gandalf, which is why he wouldn't take the ring from Bilbo, or rather, he wouldn't take the ring from Frodo, because he knew that he would be tempted to play the role of Sauron here, but he's willing to keep temptation at bay for that very reason, whereas Sauron is not, because he has pride. And remember, the shadow of pride blocks your vision from seeing clearly, and so that's where he finds himself. Now, there's some talk about sending the ring to Tom Bombadil, because obviously the ring doesn't have any power over him, but Gandalf says no, that wouldn't be a great idea. It says that he wouldn't take it willingly. Now, he might do so. He might take the ring if all the free folk of the world begged him, but he would not understand the need. And if he were given the ring, he would soon forget it, or most likely throw it away. Such things have no hold on his mind. He would be a most unsafe guardian, and that alone is answer enough. You see, Tom he's obviously good, but he is kind of a pacifist, and he doesn't even really understand power. I think he's best understood as some kind of creature of fairy. Like he engages with the world differently than we do. And so not everybody is supposed to be a Tom. That's what Glorfindel is about to say. In fact, let's just read that. But in any case, said Glorfindel, to send the ring to him would only postpone the day of evil. He is far away. We could not now take it back to him, unguessed, unmarked by any spy. And even if we could, soon or late the Lord of the Rings would learn of its hiding place and would bend all his power towards it. Could that power be defied by Bombadil alone? I think not. I think that in the end, if all else is conquered, Bombadil will fall, last as he was first, and then night will come. So the pacifism of Bombadil has its place. It's a good thing, but at the same time, it's not the only good. And sometimes you need something to be more active. Sometimes you need to actively oppose the enemy. You need light to not just keep the shadow back, but to actually push it back. The light needs to move forward in such a way that the gates of hell can't stand against it. And so there needs to be positive movement as much as there needs to be sanctuary. And so Tom Bombadil would not be a responsible ring bearer. And also, in the end, well, Sauron would win if all we had was Tom Bombadil protecting the ring. We need something more than that, as much as Tom Bombadil has his role to play. And as Gandalf says, it is not our part here to take thought only for a season, or for a few lives of men, or for a passing age of the world. We should seek a final end of this menace, even if we do not hope to make one. And that right there is significant. It's this important relationship between hope and despair, that they aren't confident. They don't have blind optimism. They don't know that they're going to win, but the alternative doesn't give them much reason to give up. And so I think I said this last time, that Tolkien's characters, or his heroes, are not optimists. What they give us is not optimism. What they give us is hope in the face of despair. And that is, I think, the best kind of hope. It's a good symbol of what I think faith really is. It's the idea that, like, I don't know. I don't see clearly what waits in front of me, but I know what responsibility I have right now. I know the next step that I need to take, and so I'm going to take that step in faith, that as I continue faithfully taking the step right in front of me, I'll end up where it is that I'm supposed to be. I think that right there is a good lesson in it's how to live your life. It's how do you live by faith. You simply do what is required of you now, believing that the rest will, well, it's going to work its way out as it's supposed to. Now, of course, Boromir says, it is a gift, that we should use this to fight back against Sauron. But of course, that's not going to work. And he's told, its strength, Boromir, is too great for anyone to wield at will, save only those who have already a great power of their own. But for them it holds an even deadlier peril. The very desire of it corrupts the heart. Consider Sauron. If any of the wise should with this ring overthrow the Lord of Mordor, using his own arts, he would then set himself on Sauron's throne, and yet another Dark Lord would appear. And this is another reason why the ring should be destroyed. As long as it is in the world, it will be a danger even to the wise. For nothing is evil in the beginning. Even Sauron was not so. I fear to take the ring to hide it. I will not take the ring to wield it. And that line right there about even Sauron, right, he's not evil from the beginning. Well, that's something we're going to talk about a little bit more next week when I'm going to get more into the backstory of Sauron. Who is he? What are his motivations? I think that's worth reviewing. But more to this specific point, Boromir says we should just use the ring against Sauron. But of course that wouldn't work because, well, even if you were able to do so, even if the wise, one of the great elves, one of, Gandalf, if they were to wield the ring against Sauron and win, well, now they just become another Sauron. And so that wouldn't actually do what it is that they're setting out to do. You don't drive out fire with fire. You don't drive out power with power. You need to, well, sometimes you need to engage in the foolish in order to overthrow the wise. I think that's definitely what the correction that Boromir is receiving here. That to really gain power, to really gain freedom, you have to open your hand, let the power go, let sin go, let the say no to temptation, because that's the only way to actually gain true freedom, the kind of freedom that you're supposedly fighting for. Freedom over the shadow, including the shadow that is within. Now, the question is raised, what's going to happen to these elven rings if the one ring is destroyed? And Elrond doesn't really know. He says that some people think that the rings will now just be more themselves. Some people think that the rings will lose their power altogether, and that's what Elrond seems to believe. And of course, that is what ends up happening. And so even though these rings weren't made by Sauron, they are not immediately under the control of Sauron, especially since he doesn't have the ruling ring. The ruling ring is still their ruler. And so these rings have a good role to play. They have some value to them, but they're still wrapped up in this idea of power, of holding on to things that aren't meant to be held on to. And Tolkien says as much in letter 181. He says that mere change as such is not represented as evil. It is the unfolding of the story, and to refuse this is, of course, against the design of God. And so the elves, they use their rings in order to preserve nature, to keep things from moving forward, to keep things from changing. And Tolkien says that that's not necessarily a good thing. Change is not always bad. And so it may be that they are refusing to let things play their natural course. They're not accepting the right kind of fading. But the elvish weakness is in these terms, naturally, to regret the past and to become unwilling to face change, as if a man were to hate a very long book still going on and wish to settle down in a favorite chapter. Hence they fell in a measure to Sauron's deceits. They desired some power over things as they are, to make their particular will to preservation effective, to arrest change, and keep things always fresh and fair. So the elves of Region in particular, were willing to work with disguised Sauron to make these rings because they wanted to stop change. They wanted to maintain stagnation, but that's not necessarily a good thing. As Tolkien says, that's like you love the book that you're in, and so you never are willing to finish it. You just stay in your favorite chapter. But the problem is that if you're not willing to finish the book, then you don't really love the book. You just simply love what you love a part of the book. You love what part of it makes you feel. But if you really loved the book, then you would see it to its end. You would finish it. You would carry through with that level of devotion, not simply to the way things are, but the way that things are becoming, recognizing that the becoming very much impacts the being of the present. And so, too, if we really do love the plan of God, right? We love the narrative of creation, then we need to be willing to accept change. That doesn't mean we pursue progress for the sake of progress, right? That's part of the same impulse that actually led to the creation of the ring. But we do learn we accept the wave that is sent to us, to reference Paralandra. And so part of accepting providence is being willing to move forward. Well, Frodo takes the ring, or he agrees to take the ring to Mordor, and Elrond says that he's not going to push him into it, but at the same time he recognizes this is the right move. that, as Gandalf said back in Shadow of the Past, that Frodo is meant to find the ring, that this is his quest that was fated for him, but he still had to, he had to agree to it. And so again, we get the interchange between fate and free will. And we're told that the road must be trod, but it will be very hard, and neither strength nor wisdom will carry us far upon it. This quest may be attempted by the weak as with as much hope as the strong. Yet such is oft the course of deeds that move the wheels of the world. Small hands do them, because they must, while the eyes of the great are elsewhere. I think it's worth bringing in letter 131 here. But as the earliest tales are seen through elvish eyes, as it were, this last great tale, Lord of the Rings, coming down from myth and legend to the earth, is seen mainly through the eyes of hobbits. It thus becomes, in fact, anthropocentric, but through hobbits, not men so called, because the last tale is to exemplify most clearly a recurrent theme, the place in world polity of the unforeseen and unforeseeable acts of will and deeds of virtue, of the apparently small, ungreat, forgotten in the places of the wise and great, good as well as evil. The moral of the whole tale is the obvious one, that without the high and noble, the simple and vulgar is utterly mean, and without the simple and ordinary, the noble and heroic is meaningless. In Tolkien's work, we see that the small and the lowly is important. The ordinary is important, as much as the high and the great and the heroic are important. That one, or rather, they both are for the other, and both are uplifted and ennobled, and made more themselves by the other. But in this case, obviously, the focus is on the small, on the humble, on people like the hobbits, people like Frodo of the Shire. So Elrond goes on, "This is the hour of the Shire-folk, when they arise from their quiet fields to shake the towers and councils of the great. Who of all the wise could have foreseen it? Or if they are wise, why should they expect to know it until the hour has struck?" And that right there, I mean, it's the kind of thing that should hit your heart. It should bring some tears to your eyes. It's this basic Christian idea that the meek are made strong and are used to accomplish great and even world-shaping things to move the wheels of the world. But it is a heavy burden, so heavy that none could lay it on another. I do not lay it on you, but if you take it freely, I will say that your choice is right. And though all the mighty elf friends of old, Hador and Hurin and Turin and Beren himself were assembled together, your seat should be among them. Elrond elevates Frodo up to the place of Hurin and Turin and Beren, these great heroes of the Silmarillion, because though he's lowly, though he's weak, though he doesn't have the kind of strength of any of these characters that were just listed off, he does have the strength of will. And that right there is primary regarding what strength means for Tolkien. It comes down to the strength of will, the strength of determination, to do what is right, not because you're strong enough, but because it's right and you don't have any other choice but to play the hero and to carry out the task that is appointed to you. That's all you need to do. Carry out the task that is appointed to you. That's how you play the hero. And then we get some good quips from between Gimli and Elrond. Elrond says that there's no binding commitment to this fellowship. Basically, go with them as long as you want to. And Gimli says, "Faithless is he that says farewell when the road darkens." "Maybe," said Elrond, "but let him not vow to walk in the dark who has not seen the nightfall. Yet sworn word may strengthen quaking heart." "Or break it," said Elrond. "Look not too far ahead. But now go with good hearts. Farewell, and may the blessing of the elves and men and all free folk go with you. May the stars shine upon your faces." So I think it's just a good interchange between Elrond and Gimli. I think Tolkien is showing us how Proverbs can carry deep wisdom, but, sometimes it's not always easy to see, which one should be played where and at what time. But I think that Gimli is definitely making some important points here, that a real friend, a real companion, is going to be with you until the end. We've already seen this in the Hobbits, especially going back to Conspiracy Unmasked, when we get the commitments that Merry, Pippin, and Sam make to Frodo, not knowing what lies in front of them. And, Elrond says that, okay, you can't really make those commitments if you don't know what the road looks like ahead of you. But Gimli says that, okay, a sworn word may strengthen the quaking heart. In other words, maybe it's actually a good thing to make some vows, to make some commitments in the light before you get to the dark, because if you are somebody of integrity, you're somebody of your word, then that will preserve you when everything else seems to be falling apart, when your heart seems to be failing you. You at least have your word to carry you through, and I like that. And I think it's one of the ways that we see in the book that Gimli is this deep, profound, generally serious character, unlike in the movies where he's made into comic relief. We definitely see a stronger philosopher warrior in the books with Gimli. Now, I'm not going to read this whole interchange, but there is some argument as they go up the mountain, as they go up Caradhras, about what is causing the mountain to be so hostile. There's some question of, okay, is Sauron, is he reaching out his power here, causing the mountain to be particularly harsh to them? And they say basically maybe. There's some theory that it's the mountain itself that has grown angry. This seems to be the conclusion that Gimli draws. It's what Aragorn supposes when he says that there are many evil and unfriendly things in the world that have little love for those that go on two legs, and yet are not in league with Sauron, but have purposes of their own. Some have been in this world longer than he. And so just as the old forest was hostile toward those who go on 2 feet, maybe just this mountain has become so corrupted, right? It's full of orcs, and the dwarven civilization that once lived there has been slaughtered. You've got a Balrog living down there somewhere, and so there's just a lot of corruption in the land that I think is making the mountain itself hostile, and it gives us a deeper, a richer world than we get in the movies, where you just have Sauron is directly singing this song and causing the blizzard and whatnot. And what we get in Tolkien's books is that, like, there are a lot of things that are set against our heroes. There are a lot of things that are set against people that aren't necessarily in direct alignment with Sauron. That there can be multiple evils, even if we do say that they all participate in evil, that they all bear corruption. They bear corruption in different ways, and things are kind of complicated, right? I mean, you can have a Hitler and a Stalin in the same world. And so the fact that there are multiple evils, I think, just makes things more realistic. There are multiple forms of corruption. Now, again, I'm not going to read all this, but I think it's just another good example of a differentiation in character between the books and the movies. In the book, elves in general, I think, are just very different. They're not nearly as serene and serious as they always are in the movies. For Legolas is just kind of joking around with Gandalf, and so Gandalf is, he's getting kind of grumpy, and he says that, okay, I can't just melt the snow, Legolas. Might as well go off and fetch the sun, or tell you to go fetch the sun. And then Legolas is able to jump up on top of the snow, walk on top of the snow, and he says, I'm off to get the sun. And so he's kind of a jokester, kind of has this impish quality to him. And even the fact that he can walk on the snow, he can deny basic physics, really points to the fact, or reminds us of the fact, that elves are not just men with pointy ears who live a really long time. That they really are, they're fairies. They're part of the world of Fae, which means that they engage with the world differently. They're not entirely bound by the same set of physics that we are bound by. We're even told in the books that he doesn't have boots, these cool looking boots that we get in the movies, even as you see in this image here. He has a low cut shoes, kind of what you would normally think of as a non-Tolkienian elf, simply because our picture of the elves is so shaped by the adaptations that we've been given. But these are very much, they're elves. And so you've got these short, kind of silly shoes. He's cracking jokes, and he's running off on the snow. And so he really gives us, I think, a more Tolkienian picture of elves than we probably have in our minds, as sort of this jokester, this trickster sort of character that we can't easily define, even what exactly he is and what his engagement with the world is like. Well, on the way to Moria, to the doors of Durin, in the movies, there's this awful section where, and by the way, to clarify, I love the movies. They're some of my favorite movies, despite my many gripes, which I feel like is worth bringing out as we go through this to disentangle what we get from the movies from what we get in the books. Well, as they're going on this pathway, Gandalf at one point in the movies tells Frodo basically he can't trust anyone. And in fact, I'll just play the short little clip.
Who then do I trust?
You must trust yourself. Trust your own strength.
Now, that right there is not at all what we see in the books. In fact, it's entirely opposite. That is not something Gandalf would say. What we see in the books from the beginning till now, and what we're going to continue to see, is the importance of fellowship. this idea of we're going to trust each other. Like, even if we have some doubts, like, we're going to trust each other. We're going to pull together. We're going to, like, we're on the same team here. And so Gandalf in the books would be much more likely to say, like, trust those who are with you, invest in them, rely on them, take courage in each other. He would not say, you're off on your own. This is an ongoing theme. This happens a few times in the movie that I've noticed as I do rewatching. This idea that Frodo is all alone and that he can't trust anybody. That's the opposite of what we get in the books about the importance of literally fellowship. It's in the name of the story. Well, they make it to the doors of Durin, and I included here a picture of the doors at St. Edward's Church over in England, and it's at least rumored that this church here, with these couple of yew trees that are grown up alongside of it, that this was inspiration for Tolkien's Doors of Durin. Such as kind of, I think it's interesting. I think it's interesting trivia there. Shortly after they make it in, we get Durin's song coming from Gimli, and I mean, there's a lot packed in there of Dwarven lore. And in fact, there's a great rendition of Durin's song that I want to play from you from Clamavi de Profundis. Hopefully I got that name right. So all credit to them. Go listen to their stuff, give them money or something. I'm not trying to steal anything from them, but I do want to include that because I just think it's a great rendition of the song. And also, when my kids were first born, it's one of the few songs that would almost always get them to calm down and stop crying. So do what you will with that information. If you don't feel like listening to a song right now, you can skip ahead, but I think it's worth taking a break here.
The world was young, the mountains green, no stain yet on. The moon was seen, no words were laid on stream or stone when Durin woke and walked alone. He named the nameless hills and dells, he drank from yet untasted wells. He stooped and looked in Mirror and saw a crown of stars appear as gems upon a silver thread above the shadows of his head. The world was fair, the mountains tall, in elder days before the fall of mighty kings in Argol throned and Gondolin, who now beyond the western seas that passed away, the world was fair in Durin's day. A king he was on carven throne in many pillared halls of stone, with golden roof and silver floor and runes of power upon the door. The light of sun and star and moon in shining lamps of crystal hue, dimmed by cloud or shade of night, there shone forever fair and bright. The hammer on the anvil smote, their chisel clove and graver wrote, their forged was blade and bound was hilt, the delver mind the mason built, their peril hurl and noble veil and metal wrought like fishes' veil, buckler and corslet, axe and sword and shining spears were laid in hoard. Unwearied then were Durin's folk, beneath the mountains' music walk. The harbor's heart, the minstrels sang, and at the gates the trumpets rang. The world is grey, the mountains old, the forges fire is ashen cold. No harp is rung, no hammer falls, the darkness dwells in Durin's halls. The shadow lies upon his tomb, in Moria, in Khazad-dûm. But still the sunken stars appear in dark and endless Boromir. There lies his crown in water deep, till Durin wakes again from sleep.
Now, we're also told kind of how we got into the situation. You know, the dwarves delved too greedily and too deep. They were getting mithril. So again, we get this greed, the idea of possessiveness, that they're trying to accumulate power, but in their consumption of power, of wealth, of riches, that they end up getting consumed by it as this demon, as the Balrog comes out and kills Durin. So again, same tale of the grasped at power, the grasped by power, and ultimately consumed by it. It's the Babel story that we see all throughout the Legendarium, really. Now, I don't have a lot to say about this fight around the Tomb of Balin. I mean, in the movies, this is kind of a cool sequence and it takes a little while, but it's actually pretty quick in the book. But what I do want to highlight is the fact that when Frodo, when the hobbits go off to fight, that they consistently yell the Shire. This is an ongoing thing in the books, that when they're engaging in fights, they yell the Shire. And I think this really highlights the fact that the hobbits aren't setting out to change the world. That the reason why they left the Shire to begin with wasn't to hike off to Mordor. The original reason why Frodo left the Shire was to keep the Shire safe, to get the ring away. And so really his whole mission and what he's doing here is built around his protection of the Shire. And so it's like he sets out to save his home, and in saving his home, he ends up saving the world. And I think that kind of localism, which is so important for Tolkien, is very much at display here. That even when they find themselves in Moria, that their heart is still in the Shire, and they're fighting for and in service of the Shire. And so I think that localism is important to note. All right, now we get to the Bridge of Khazad-dûm. Now, first of all, regarding our depiction of the Balrog. Now, I think what we get in the movies, it's really cool. I think maybe that works for cinema, but doesn't actually match the description that we get very well in the books. We're told in the books that the Balrog was, could not be seen. It was like a great shadow, in the middle of which was a dark form of a man shape maybe, yet greater, and a power and terror seemed to be in it and to go before it. And so the Balrog looks like a man, but is cloaked in fire and shadow. And I think this helps us to better understand that what we're dealing with is one of the Maiar. This is the same kind of spiritual thing as Gandalf or as the other wizards. And so this is a lesser angel, corrupted, so now I guess something like a demon. But this is the same kind of thing as Gandalf on some level. And so that's why even before they directly fight with each other, that there's this contest of wills. Remember when Gandalf is like trying to close the door, and so he's fighting with his will with the Balrog. It's a kind of spiritual warfare at place between the angelic Gandalf and the demonic Balrog. Now, as Gandalf gets ready to face off against the Balrog, he tells everyone to run away because, well, they can't handle it. He's going to stand in to fight by himself. But in the books, Aragorn and Boromir did not heed the command, but still held their ground side by side behind Gandalf at the very edge of the bridge. The others halted just within the doorway at the hall's end and turned, unable to leave their leader to face the enemy alone. And I think this is important to particularly highlight Boromir's character. From the movies alone, he seems corrupted from the very beginning. And yeah, he has his temptations for sure, but Boromir very much is a hero. He is a tragic hero. He has a fall, and of course he's going to have his redemption. But like, he is a hero that he doesn't know what it is that they're dealing with here. Some kind of demonic monster. And surely like, he recognizes he doesn't have the strength to really to defeat this thing, but he's willing to stand and fight and to defend the party. And so he very much is a good guy. He is a hero. Although he is a tragic hero, he has his faults. He is a hero nonetheless. And I think that we need to redeem something of the legacy of Boromir away from the movies, which, I mean, to be fair, I mean, I get why Jackson has to simplify some things for the movies, so I don't know how much of a criticism that is of the movies, but I do want to highlight that difference with the books. That Aragorn and Boromir really have to be just pushed aside because both of them want to stand there. They're even defying the commands of Gandalf for as long as they can. And then, of course, Gandalf gives his "you cannot pass" declaration to the Balrog. Now, I do want to emphasize the distinction here. In the movies, Gandalf famously says, "you shall not pass." He issues a command. Well, in the books, he actually says, "you cannot pass." And that might not sound as cool because it doesn't sound as archaic and grandiose, but in reality, it's a much more definitive statement. When he says, "you shall not pass," he's saying, "I'm telling you not to pass." But to say "you cannot pass" means literally, you are unable to pass. He's stating a fact, saying the Balrog cannot pass because Gandalf is standing here as a servant of the Secret Fire, wielder of the Flame of Honor. You cannot pass. The dark fire will not avail you. These are all declarative statements. They're not commands. They're statements of fact. Go back to the shadow. You cannot pass. So Gandalf identifies himself as a servant of the Secret Fire. We'll go back to the Eindolindale. This is the fire that Eru Ilúvatar puts at the heart of creation to give it being. And so on one hand, and Tolkien says this in one of his letters, the Secret Fire is something like the gift of existence. It's being, which only God properly has. Everything else borrows it. And so Gandalf is a servant of the fire that ultimately is a revelation of Eru Ilúvatar, of God. And actually, in one of his interviews, he directly states that the Secret Fire is the Holy Spirit. So there's that as well. And it may be that Tolkien didn't know exactly what it was, but it's at least something in that arena as a way of indicating that Gandalf, as this angelic figure, is standing in the service of God, the light of God, over against the shadow. And then he calls him the Flame of Udun, which was basically the basement, or it's like the underworld underneath Morgoth's lair. And so he's calling him a demon of Morgoth here. And then, of course, the bridge breaks and they plunge down together. And so what are our major themes of these chapters? Well, obviously sacrifice. If you want to be great, you must be a servant. If you grasp at greatness, you're going to miss it. You're going to miss meaning as your vision is consumed with the pride of your own shadow. Frodo agreed to take the ring, not because he was great, but because the need was great, and he recognized his role, although he did not know the way and he would need to rely on others. Elrond recognized that he was not truly in charge of his council, but that he was a facilitator of Providence. The Fellowship continually supports each other. Even Boromir, alongside Aragorn, determines to fight the Balrog, despite their almost certain failure, because they recognize that they were part of a story bigger than themselves. In short, no Hobbit joke intended, play your role. Remember that you are not the story, but that you do have an important role to play in the story. After all, the great policies of world history, the wheels of the world, are often turned not by the lords and governors, but by the seemingly unknown and the weak. Until next time, Godspeed. All right, I hope that you enjoyed that, and if you did, then I encourage you to support my work over on patreon.com/mythicmind. Even a little bit of support will allow you to join our Discord server, will allow you to participate in our podcast conversations. You get all 3 Mythic Mind podcasts delivered early and ad-free into a single feed, and also, of course, you just support the various things that I am doing, and that's always very much appreciated. Also welcome you, leave me a 5-star review and comment on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever else you can do that. Share the show around with your friends. And if you are listening to this right when it comes out, then up until the end of June 18th, I'm currently running a 50% special on annual patronage. And so become a patron at any level right now, up until the end of the 18th, and you'll get 50% off of that price. And as a reminder, if you become a Tier 3 patron, then you can participate in the Kierkegaard course that I'll be running in the fall, as well as anything else that I do within that yearly term. But if you're listening on the freebie feeds, then the next thing to come out from Mythic Mind will be on the Mythic Mind Games podcast on Friday, as well as on the YouTube channel, as Micah and I discuss Final Fantasy VII Remake. And so hopefully I will talk to you then.